Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. We are going to be looking at the FSSC 22000 version 6 changes as published in April 2023. Before we start, let us just go through the house rules. If you could just please mute yourself if you are logging in. I do understand that we have got quite a big group attending today, but I'd kindly request you to please mute yourselves. And if you have got any questions or comments, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the session. I do realize that some of us are in large groups at our respective companies, and also that we are coming from the different parts of the world. But of course, if you have got any questions, you are more than welcome to then ask those questions. At the end of the session, once I've done the presentation, we will go through that Q&A session, and the language of communication today will be English. I have a list of questions that you have asked. I think I've got about 30 questions. I will attempt to answer to them based on how long the session takes. But perhaps if your question is not answered, we could then take it offline and then respond to it at through email if time allows. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much once again for attending in numbers and also with your teams. My name is Mtokozi Sinkosi. I am a consultant, a food safety consultant. Okay. I'm an auditor here at ASC, and I've audited for different certification bodies, but now I am a full-time consultant here at ASC Consultants. So I have done this for the past 10 years, auditing, consulting, and implementing systems. And I do hope that with the experience that I've accumulated through the years in the SADC countries, I will be able to assist you with whatever questions that you may have. Okay, a request once more, please mute yourself. If you log in, just quickly mute yourself. And if you log out for some reason and come back again, please mute yourself. The session is recorded for purposes of those who would want to have recordings, and if there is anything that we'll need to do to improve our offering, we have then decided that it is best that we record this session for those reasons. We of course can share that recording for those with the recording with those who have attended the session. Okay, so we're going to start with the presentation. And we are going to carry on. Hopefully by 10:45 I'll be done. Then in between we may take a minute break depending on how long it takes for me to go through the entire presentation. Of course, since the last webinar, as we have been hosting these webinars on monthly basis or on every 2 weeks, we have added some things based on the new guidance documents that have been shared by FSSC 22000 and the various stakeholder meetings that we have had to attend. Okay. So we are going to do this webinar or conduct this webinar in 3 parts. We are going to start with the introduction, introducing FSSC 22000 version 6 changes. And then we are going to proceed to part 1. We are going to look at the scheme overview. And then lastly, we are going to look at part 2, which will then be the additional requirements that have been, of course, introduced, which most of the sites will be audited as from next year. All right, so there are 4 main reasons for the updated version of the FSSC 22000 scheme, as we saw the publication in April 2023. The most important was the integration of the requirements with those of the ISO 22000 Part 3, which is the requirements for certification bodies that conduct audits and offer certification, which was previously the 2013 version, and is currently the 2022 version, which most of the certification bodies will now have to follow. Then the second one was the strengthening of the requirements to support organizations in their contribution to meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You'll see that we have got a new requirement that speaks to food loss and food waste, and it's one of those requirements that speak to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that specific requirement has no bearing in terms of the safety of the food, but it's more about ensuring that the food industry plays their role in achieving these sustainable development goals. And of course, this requirement would be audited as part of the requirements that the sites that are certified will need to comply with. Then another third reason, which is key, was the GFSI requirements. As you know, it was updated in 2020, if you remember, and most of the sites that had not complied with this requirement were suspended. One of the, not the sites specifically, the schemes. If you remember, IFS, which was previously GFSI, was suspended for some time until they had to update their requirements to align with the GFSI scheme requirements. And then thereafter, they were accepted back into the GFSI benchmarking scheme. So that was because they had not updated their requirements to align with the GFSI requirements. And FSSC saw that coming, and they decided that for them to remain GFSI recognized, they would need to update their site requirements. Then another reason, you'll see that some of the changes don't necessarily have anything to do with, they don't really have new content. It's just editorial changes and amendments as part of continuous improvement, grammar, the flow of the scheme requirements of the standard, how it reads. So it's mostly grammatical corrections that have been made. So that is just the four main reasons for the updated version of the FSSC 22000 scheme. So let's look at the main changes. Let's start with the main changes. What are new things that have been introduced? So the first one is the introduction of category that relates to the handling of plants, which previously was not in place. The introduction of subcategory CD relating to animal conversion, and there has been clarity that has been provided by the FSSC 22000 scheme to indicate exactly what that means. The scheme has also introduced new requirements on quality control, food loss and waste, equipment management. You'll see that most other standards like your BRCGS have already introduced this. And FSSC, it was just about time that they introduced this requirement to align with the GFSI recognized scheme. And the sites that are certified to FSSC packaging for food materials, they've introduced requirements for artwork design and approval procedure. And then, of course, they've added QR codes for FSSC 22000 certificates to strengthen security and authenticity. There are also additional subcategories that have been introduced, and some have been removed. So we are going to go through that during the presentation. What has been modified? Modification of category F, which is now trading, retail, wholesale, and e-commerce. Category D has been reworded to read processing of feed and animal food. The integration of the requirements on food safety and quality culture, which has been very specific as to, in terms of the guidance document, what will be required from the sites in order to be found compliant with this requirement. There has been also a strengthened existing additional requirements in Part 2 of the scheme, including but not limited to allergen management and environmental monitoring. I have also included this guidance document for environmental monitoring because it's, if you look at the audits that have been conducted since 2020, this is where the problem has been under environmental monitoring. And I do hope that today we are going to provide clarity to assist in terms of interpreting this requirement. There has also been changes and clarification on requirements for the certification process, indicating how one could get certified to FSSC 22000. What has been removed? What has been taken completely out of the scheme? FSSC 22000 quality has been removed. If you remember, sites had the option to be certified under FSSC 22000 looking at food manufacturing. They also had an option to have an additional certification which was FSSC 22000 quality. So that was aligned to ISO 9001 2015. More or less, it was almost the same requirement, but they've decided the viability of this is not sustainable, and they've completely removed it. So sites that want to retain a quality certification, they'll have to go for ISO 9001 2015 as their quality certification. Instead, FSSC has introduced what we call FSSC 24000, which is a social audit, similar to those who participate in CESA audits, META audits, CDEX audits, GRAPS audits. So those are social responsibility audits. So it's a new audit that they've introduced, and they've done a launch on it in September, and they will start implementing that for the sites that want to have an additional certification that looks at social responsibility. Okay, so farming of animals, which was previously category A, has been removed completely, and that has been done primarily to align to the scope of ISO 22003 of 2022. So that's why they have removed that. And of course, the requirements of certification bodies are aligned to part 1 of the ISO 22003 of 2022, so which speaks to the requirements for certification bodies. Okay, now let's look at the food chain subcategories, which is very important for you to decide which subcategory you belong to as a site. So we are going to look at each one of them, sample some of them that are important, look at what has been removed, what has been modified, and then take it from there. Okay, so as you know, FSSC 22000 is subcategory. So as you see here, we mentioned that category A, which looks at farming of animals, has been removed. And I did outline earlier that has been because they're aligning it to ISO 22003 part 1 of 2022 as categories as described in that. Then category B has been also modified to speak directly to the pre-processing handling of plant products. And they've clarified here what exactly does that mean. So here we are talking about activities on harvested plants that do not transform the product from original whole form. So those are the sites that still keep the product as they are, which could include, cleaning, just washing, rinsing, fluming, sorting, grading, but not necessarily completely changing the product. So that is the pre-process stage. And of course, if you are at that site, you will still use part 1 of the technical specification for food manufacturing. Then there is category C, C0, which speaks to primary animal conversion. So animal primary conversion, where we are looking at the conversion of animal carcass intended for further processing, including lairage, slaughter, evisceration, bulk chilling, etc. So then C1, no major changes there, except that there is a wording that has been corrected, where they've added that is processing and packaging, including fishery products that require chilling or frozen temperature control, and also the processing of pet food from animal products only. So if you belong to that level where you process pet food from animal products only, then C1 will be the subcategory that you'll belong to. And then C2, again, no major changes, nothing that has rocks a boat there. But interestingly, recognizing the newer technology that is being introduced, they've also added plant-based meat and dairy substitute. Since it's something that is gaining traction throughout the world, especially in the first world countries, and definitely also in South Africa, we are also seeing a lot of companies developing lab-grown meat. So if you are such a company and you want to get certification, then C2 will be the category that you'll have to go for. And then C3, here it includes catering of kitchens as well, so which is very interesting that they've introduced under this category. If you look at that, the normative documents that we are using is part 1, interestingly there. So under C3, that is processing of perishable animal and plant products, which could be mixed products. So it's not just plant-based as C2. So if it's mixed product, that could include off-site catering kitchens, including products of industrial kitchens not offered for immediate consumption, processing perishable pet food from mixed products, then that will fall under C3. This they have added because of the rising trend for convenient foods that are being processed, that are being created on site, and then you sell it to retailers. So if you are doing that, then you'll fall under this category. But be careful here. If you are a site that has a catering facility for immediate consumption, we are not going to use this technical specification. Rather, you are going to use part 2 of the technical specification and not necessarily part 1. Then C4 deals with the processing and packaging of products stored and sold at ambient temperature, including canned foods, as well as processing of ambient stable pet food. So that will be the C4, which is processing of ambient stable products. Then D is now just one category instead of being categorized into different categories. Here under D, the processing of feed and animal food. So they have combined most of these categories to one, but separated it based on the source of preparing the food. So here we are looking at processing feed material intended for food and non-food producing animals not kept in households. For example, meal from grain, oilseeds, byproducts of food production, and then processing of feed mixtures with or without additives. Okay. So those are the subcategories. And then under under E, that is when the restaurants, if you're a catering facility and you serve food, this is where you also belong. So that means catering or food service sites, you'll be audited under part 2 of the technical specification, which is quite different from this one, which is you are preparing food as a kitchen, but you are not going to immediately consume the food. So that will be then the difference here under C3. So just take note of that. Another interesting one, which is category F for entrepreneurs, e-commerce entrepreneurs, they have now also been taken into account. We have got storage and provision of finished products to customers and consumers that may be retail outlets, shops, wholesales. Maybe you have got a nice catering company, but you are not actually producing food for immediate consumption. So it's prepared food, which is gaining traction in South Africa. You want to supply for your Spar, your Woolworths, your Checkers, and you want certification for that because it's a requirement that they require. You will fall under category F, which is quite interesting. Then again, which is groundbreaking, I think, for FSSC, since other certification bodies were actually way ahead in terms of this requirement. Category F that looks at brokering, trading, or e-commerce. So assuming that you are exporting your product, we would normally use a broker or an agent to export our food. FSSC 22000 did not necessarily cater for those, but now with the new category F, this has been taken into account, but there is no technical specification for that. You only use 22000, 2018, as well as the additional requirements. Of course, category G, again, transport and storage services, storage facilities and distribution vehicles for perishable food and feed will belong to category G. So they've removed all the other subcategories under G. And then I, it's still about production of packaging material in contact with food, feed, and animal feed. That may include packaging produced on site for use in processing. K, it was just an editorial modification there. Now let's go to part 2. And now in part 2, we are going to look at some of the additional requirements. We are not going to look at those that we previously had. We are going to focus on the changes only. So if you see me skipping some of the requirements, it essentially means that there is nothing that has been changed there. So I will then just proceed to the next one. So do not worry if I skip something and you think that I have forgotten. It is merely because there hasn't been any change, and thus there is no need for me to mention it. Okay. So We are familiar with the management of services and purchase materials, which is, of course, applicable to all food categories. So with this category, there has been a change in terms of who exactly it should be applicable to. So for food chain category, C0, C1, C3, and C4, the organization is now required to ensure that they have a policy for the procurement of animals, fish, and seafood. So if your organization falls under these categories, you are then required to ensure that you take into account having a policy that looks into then the procurement of animals, fish, and seafood. Then for category 1, in addition to the clause 7.1.6 of ISO 20000/2018, the organization shall establish a criteria related to the use of recycled packaging as a raw material input into the production of finished packaging material and ensure that relevant legal and customer requirements are being met. For those of you who are producing packaging, you'll see that throughout the world, there has been new legislation that is being introduced that takes into account recycled packaging. In the EU, for example, that's one of the groundbreaking legislations that were introduced, I think, in September 2022. So if you do export to the EU and you are a food packaging company, you will need to look at this clause very closely and ensure that you align with these requirements. And then let's look at clause 2.5.2 that looks at product labeling, and it's applicable to all food chain categories. No one is exempted here. So if you look at clause 6 or requirement number C, requirement number C, where you make a claim. So if a claim is about a nutritional a method of production, chain of custody, raw material, you make those such claims on the product label or packaging. You as an organization must maintain the evidence of validation to support the claim that you have made. So if you are saying that my product is organic, my product is, has this nutritional information, as a site, you must have that nutritional test that you have done to confirm that whatever claim that I'm making on the food package and labeling and label is indeed compliant, and you have to produce that as part of the audit. So you cannot just make a claim without supporting it with the information provided. So even if it's a method of production, the raw material status, let's say that you are making a claim about the product being Global Gap certified, you will need to produce evidence that indeed it complies with the claim that you have made. Then for food chain category 1 or category I, the artwork management and print control procedures shall be established and implemented to ensure that the printed material meets applicable customer and legal requirements. So we have separated into two. So the new, in terms of approval, you are supposed to list the following: the approval of artwork standard or master sample. For those of you in the packaging, food packaging field, you'd understand exactly what we mean by a master sample. Then the process to manage changes to artwork and print specification and to manage obsolete artwork and printing material shall be addressed as part of the procedure. Okay, then also there must be approval that is mentioned in your procedure of each print run against the agreed standard or master sample. So your procedure must also take that into account. And then in terms of the process too, your procedure should also consider the procedures that shall address the minimum of process to detect and identify printing errors during the run, the process to ensure effective segregation of different print variants, and the process to account for any unused printed product, either that you'd use as a rework or whether it's waste. Whatever the case may be, you must have a procedure that explains how you are going to handle that. We were introduced to food defense quite some time back. Here, there has been just a grammatical or editorial change, but also there are some small changes that could also affect you as a site. So if you look at the first change then, the organization shall conducts and documents the food defense threat assessment based on a defined methodology. So whichever methodology that you use as a site will be acceptable, but you must define it in order to identify and evaluate potential threats linked to the processes and products within the scope of the organization. And then you shall develop and implement appropriate mitigation measures for significant threats. So in this case, if you have got a certain method of doing food defense, some of us use the FDA requirements, for example, the food defense tool. Some of us develop our own risk assessment, and some of us, we do a threat assessment based on the process flow. That method that we are using, you just must have a procedure in place to define how you as a site will conduct your food defense threat assessment. So if it makes sense, it's logical, it will be accepted as long as you have defined it. So that's what this requirement seeks to address. Then it goes further that the organization shall have documented food defense plan, which was previously in place, but it must be based on threat assessment that you as a site have done, specifying the mitigation measures and verification procedures. So the verification procedures will be, what is it that you have done? What is it that you are going to do to ensure that you're still in compliance with the requirements? Then it goes further that it must cover the processes and products within the scope of the organization, and you shall ensure that you keep it up to date. It goes further that for food chain category F2, in addition to the above, the organization shall ensure their suppliers have a food defense plan. So if you belong under food chain category F2, it is your responsibility to ensure that your suppliers have a food defense plan. So that is for brokering, trading, or e-commerce. You shall ensure that whoever supplies you does in fact have a food defense plan, because perhaps as a broker, you may not necessarily be required to have a food defense plan if you are not handling the product, but it's your responsibility to ensure that your suppliers do in fact have that food defense plan and you keep it as part of your records. What is it that the auditors will be looking for in this case? They won't necessarily always want to see the food defense plan of the suppliers. They may ask you, please provide evidence that you have conducted an assessment to check if the supplier has a food defense plan. So we just need evidence that you have checked whether your supplier has a food defense plan, and not necessarily that we'd want to see the food defense plan. But if you do that, it's fine. It is part of your evidence collection. So we would accept it nonetheless. Okay. Right. Let's proceed and talk about food fraud. Remember, food fraud is intentional contamination of food for economic or financial gain. So again, here, the changes are similar to the food defense plan, just that the wording speaks only to the food fraud. So the one thing that perhaps I can sample out here that is of particular interest is that the plan should comply with the applicable legislation, cover the processes and products within the scope of the organization, and be kept up to date. So in South Africa currently, we don't necessarily have any legislation that is looking at food fraud specifically, but we do have a regulation that relates to food labeling. So we have got R146 of 2010 at this moment with associated amendments. So you must make sure that you do not mislead the consumer in any way. So that's the legislation that will be used. And of course, the Act 68 of 2008, which is about the Consumer Protection Act. So in terms of the legislation that will be looking at here, it's those two legislation, R146 of 2010, as well as Act 68 of 2008, that looks at the consumer protection. Of course, as we are aware, the labeling legislation or regulation is under review. We have just submitted comments in September for the new labeling regulation. So depending on the changes that they make, which are quite groundbreaking, if you have got a chance, please read through that regulation and see how it will affect your organization if it is published in that draft form. So if then that regulations come to play, of course, it will mean that regulation R146 is no longer applicable and will use it to audit your facility. So in the master list of your documents, that that those two the legislations must be in place, the Consumer Protection Act as well as Regulation R146, since food fraud also touches on that, since it speaks to the labeling of food products. Great. So under food fraud, that is a major thing that I think we can mention. Again, if you are a broker, you should ensure that your suppliers do have the food fraud mitigation plan in place. So you'll see that under requirement D of 2.5.4.2. Then local use, nothing groundbreaking there, except that the certified organization is not allowed to use the FSSC 22,000 logo, any statement or make reference to its certified status on the product, its labeling, its packaging, the certificate of analysis or certificates of conformance. So that would be the COAs and COCs. I have seen quite a number of sites that have got that label. We are FSSC 22,000 certified sites on the product. You are not allowed to do that. So it's very clear that it says any statement or make reference to its certified status on the product, the certificate of analysis, the certificate of conformance, or in any other manner that implies FSSC 22,000 approves a product, process, or service, and where exclusions to the scope of certifications apply. So you can only use it for marketing activities such as the organization's printed matter, the website, and other promotional items, but not on your product. So most of the sites that I've seen are at fault when it comes to this requirement, which is actually not necessarily a new requirement, but most of us, we are just not aware of it. Big changes under clause 2.5.6. And just to give you a heads up here, most of the auditors, especially in the auditors meetings that I've attended, there is going to be a major focus on this requirement. So please take note, those of you who have got possible allergens in your facility, please take note of this requirement. So the first thing that has been introduced is that the site shall have a list of all the allergens handled on site, including in raw materials and finished products. So what does it mean? It means that you have got to go through your certificate of analysis, your specifications for your raw materials, and identify the potential allergens that your supplier has identified, and make sure that you take them through your risk assessment. Again, the identification and implementation of control measures to reduce or eliminate the risk of cross-contamination based on the outcome of the risk assessment shall be in place, and it must be included in your documented allergen management plan. And then it goes further and reads as follows: that validation and validation of these control measures are to be documented. So if you have got any control measure that you have done to prove perhaps that there is no risk of cross-contamination, you are supposed to do a validation study and verify that that control measure is still working effectively. Remember, when we are talking about validation, I did see a question: what is a validation or versus verification from Zuko? Here, we must, when we are saying that is validation, we are doing a study to prove that whatever control measure that you are going to implement, it can work, right? Verification, we are checking whether it's working. So let's make an example. If I'm saying that the way that I'm going to control, maybe I've got an allergen with gluten, and then I say that I use high heat and acids to try to reduce the gluten in wheat and completely eliminate it in my material using the acidity and also heat, because we know that the combination of that could remove gluten. Then if you do that, you must do a study, send it to a laboratory to check if the protein is still there. If then it is no longer there because of the methods that we have done, the heat, the high heat, as well as maybe a chemical that is acid-based, that is a validation. You just need to write up, this is what I did, this is the equipment that it did, this is the material that I use, or the raw material that that it went through, and these are the tests that I did. And following my study, there was no gluten that was present. Verification will then be based on your risk assessment, where you are checking on regular basis if gluten is still there. You don't need to do a similar study where you are checking for protein, DNA, whatever test that you'll be using. You could maybe use swabs. You could use whatever control measure, but the control measure that you are verifying with should have been part of your validation study to prove that it can detect the absence or presence of gluten. So if you send it to the lab and swab that material and proving that when you swab it before gluten was cleaned, it could detect it, and after cleaning it could not detect it, and that coincide with that or correspond to the lab results, then that verification method will be accepted, and then you can continue verifying on based on the risk assessment that you have done for that specific sites. So it doesn't mean that you always have to redo the validation unless there is a change of the allergen and the protein that you are trying to control. Then you may have to relook at your initial validation to see if it is still applicable for that particular allergen. So that, I hope I've explained that. Okay, so then it goes further that precautionary or warning labels shall only be used where the risk assessment identifies allergen cross-contamination as a risk to the consumer, even though all the necessary controls have been effectively implemented. It also specifies that all personnel shall, okay, they shall receive training in allergen awareness and specific training on allergen control measures associated with their area of work. So here it will be allergen awareness. We have got these number of allergens. Take note also where your product is going. We know that the USA has 9 allergens, the EU, the last I checked, they had 14 allergens. South Africa, there is a big 8. So check the destination of your product, and then you train them on allergen awareness. Why allergens are a problem? These are the products that have got allergens. These are the big 8 allergens. Again, then that is not it. That is not where you end. You then go on and train them. How do you as a site control allergens? So that is part 2 of the requirement. So most of us train them allergens. What are allergens? What can they do? These are the allergens, but we never move to the second part to show the auditor that this is how we control, and this is how I trained my staff, my team, in terms of the control measures that we implement as a site. So that's where most of us will get caught in terms of this allergen requirements. So it goes further that the allergen management plan shall be reviewed at least annually. Please take note of that. And following any significant change that impacts food safety, a public recall, or a product withdrawal by the organization as a result of an allergen, or where trends in industry show contamination of similar products relating to allergens. The review shall include an evaluation of the effectiveness of existing control measures and the need for additional measures that the site should implement. There is another key requirement. Verification data shall be trained. Very, very important that you take note of that. Verification data shall be trained for allergens, right? And it shall be used as the input at your review. Okay, so the data, you can talk about allergens, but the verification data, there should be evidence of trend analysis, and in your review, it shall be included. And then it goes further that for food chain category D, where there is no allergen-related legislation for the country of sale, remember, of sale, not of where you are manufacturing the product. Where there is no allergen-related legislation for the country of sale pertaining to animal feed, this section of the scheme requirements may be indicated as not applicable unless a claim relating to an allergen status has been made on the animal feed. I would implore you to please read the clause 2.5.6 that deals with the management of allergens. I promise you, this is where we are going to get findings as certified sites. So please pay attention to that. Now let's go to then this category, clause 2.5.7, that looks at environmental monitoring, which is applicable for food chain categories B3, category C, I, and K. So for those of you who do not remember, We did earlier on indicate the different categories, and remember that B3 speaks about pre-process handling of plant products, okay? Let's look at this requirement, and there is a guidance document that I'd like us to go through quickly to explain exactly what is expected of us as sites. So the first thing is that there must be a risk-based environmental monitoring program for the relevant pathogens, number one. So disease-causing organisms. Two, spoilage, the ones that will cause the quality of the food to be deteriorated, and indicator organisms. Okay, so we're going to just touch on that in a moment. Again, you must make sure that the evaluation of microbiological controls present comply with legal. In South Africa, our legislation, which I think is R692, is not as comprehensive in terms of the microorganisms present in food, but you could, use it. And also Regulation 638 that has, of course, the total viable microorganisms, the limits there. So please check that, because it is applicable legislation, and also your customer requirements. So, for example, your customer is Kellogg's. Your customer is Market Spencer, your customer is Unilever, and they tell you these are our requirements. You must make sure that you comply with that, because the standard says it shall comply with customer requirements. And most of us, as we audit and consult, we are familiar with the requirements of the respective customers. So just make sure that you take note of that. Data of the environmental monitoring activities, including regular trends, shall be trended. Okay, so that was something that we had already been doing in the previous version. And again, the environmental monitoring program shall be reviewed for continued effectiveness and suitability at least annually. So that's something else that we'll need to review, which is environmental monitoring program. On annual basis, there must be evidence that you are reviewing that. The trick here is to, what I would advise sites to do is to have a HACCP review, as we normally do, and we include all these things that are supposed to be reviewed on an annual basis, so that we don't miss out, because it is easy to miss all these things that we're supposed to review on an annual basis. So I'll advise you to use your HACCP review checklist, and not necessarily your management review, but your HACCP review checklist, and add all these items that you are supposed to review. So if you are not reviewing it annually, there is also something that you need to take note, that if there is any significant change related to products, processes, or legislation, so there is a new labeling legislation, for example, I would expect you to review your environmental monitoring, because it could perhaps give clarity on certain microorganisms, on certain tests. Again, also, especially those of us who are in the meat industry, we have got SANS, I think 885 that we use, that also prescribe some of the limits. We have got, for those that are using prepacked food, SANS 10156. If it's revised, those standards speak, because some of them are actually compulsory for us. You must make sure that your environmental monitoring is linked to them, because what I've seen, especially in the meat industry, when we conduct audits, is that people completely forget about those standards. Since they're being audited by the NRCS, they treat them as separate standards. So you must make sure that it forms part and parcel of your system. If there is any trend in out of specification microbial result, you are supposed to then make sure that you review your environmental monitoring program. So I would need to see that these were out of specification, and the trend is showing that we have got a problem with Salmonella, with E. coli, total bacterial count, Staphylococcus aureus. I would expect you to quickly review your environmental monitoring program, because it's telling you something. A repeat detection of pathogens during routine environmental monitoring requires you to review your environmental monitoring program, and evidence of that review, they must be presented. When there are alerts, recalls, or withdrawals relating to product produced by the organization, you are also supposed to review your environmental monitoring program. Let's quickly look at the guidance document, what it says here in terms of the environmental monitoring program. So it gives you an indication in terms of what are the things that they would expect you to look at, and it gives just an indication, a difference between what are pathogens, examples of pathogens, and what are the examples of indicator organisms. So they've just given this guidance to assist most sites to know exactly that when we're talking about pathogens, what is it that we'd expect, and what are the areas that we'd expect you to make reference to based on the character of the bacteria or pathogen, or that specific microorganism. So for example, spoilage organisms, when we are using air segment plates for testing for yeast and mold, we are expecting you to include this under spoilage organism in terms of your environmental risk assessment. And then, of course, we have got indicator organism like your coliform, Escherichia coli, that would be associated with contaminated water or fecal contamination, such as personal hands, and then your Enterobacterus here, which also, some of the pathogens are grouped under your aerobic plate count, your lactic acid bacteria, your Listeria. You see here, be careful of this. If they say Listeria species, they're not talking about Listeria monocytogenes. Listeria has about 17 strains. So they are not, I see Listeria monocytogenes under indicator organism, I would assume you don't understand that this is a pathogen. So it's Listeria species, which could be any one of the 17 strains. And then you'd want, if there is any that is detected, then you'd want to test if it's the Listeria monocytogenes. So you normally test this in your drains, in your chilled environments, to see if there is any likelihood of Listeria being present. So if you write this under here or vice versa, then it could be a problem, because we'll think that your environmental risk assessment is not as effective. Then your Pseudomonas, based on your product that you're handling and your facility, then it will be something that you'll use as indicator organism. So this is under the guidance document. They've also provided clarity in terms of the different zone areas where the introduction of hazard to the production environment can occur through various zones. So when we're talking about zone 1, we are talking about product contact surfaces where the equipment or surface can come into direct contact with the product. Then zone 2, non-food contact, etc., until up to zone 4. So the guidance sort of gives you, not even sort of, just gives you an indication how your environmental risk assessment should ideally be done based on the likelihood of cross-contamination with the product. Obviously, zone 1, this is where we are mostly concerned with possible contamination. Then zone 2 will be the next, and zone 4, it will be the least of our concern, because it is a non-food contact surface outside of the processing area. So this is not necessarily a big concern in terms of your environmental risk assessment. And here, they have indicated, in terms of your risk, how you should then analyze it in terms of the risk level. So for example, here, you'd have the zone 1, it is red. Zone 2, the risk profile is here, green, etc. And then, so it's according to the profile of your risk assessment. Of course, you are not going to just do it like this I'm doing. You are going to do a risk assessment, explain it, that what you mean by the numbering, what you mean by low, medium, high, and do a proper risk assessment to align with the different zones. And then you must also define suitable sampling protocols, which could include your swabs, your water samples, your air plates, your protein swabs, and ATP swabs. You can define that as you wish based on what is it that you are using. You must also define the sampling tools that you are going to be using, whether you're using dry or wet cotton swabs, whether we are using your sponge swabs, whether we are using Rodex samples and air samplers, and also define the sampling techniques that we are using, the sampling locations, and the test methods that will be used. If you are using an external laboratory, the external laboratory would indicate this on their reports. We should check for it, and then you can submit that. But when you are the one who's doing the sampling, please define how you would sample before you send it to the lab. It also guides you in terms of define appropriate monitoring frequencies or routine sampling. So most of us will use a sampling plan and then define when sampling is conducted. Is it conducted before cleaning, for example? You must define that. Is it done after cleaning and sanitation? Is it done pre-production or during production? So when the samples are taken, it's dependent on the intent of the sampling, and we need to understand what was your intention. Are you checking the cleaning and sanitation effectiveness, or you are checking how dirty the surfaces are, or you are also checking whether there is a pathogen present or not, and not necessarily after cleaning. And you also must define action limits. This is where the problem is. Most of the audits that I think I've been part of, this G was the problem, because you test something, but then the question that is being asked to the site is, all right, but how do you see that this is out of specification? What are you basing it on? Okay, then you say whatever that you're saying, and then I ask you, produce the evidence. If you're using a scientific study, if you're using a validation, if you are using a validation study, if you're using a regulation, if you're using a standard, make sure that is recorded in your procedure, in your environmental management procedure, that I am using these limits specified in this document to tell me whether my results are in or out of specification. Very, very important for you to do that. I promise you, this is a finding on almost 7 sites where this action criteria was not listed. So please pay attention to this. Okay, so this was under BRCGS, which has also introduced this requirement. So please pay attention. Right, let's look at another one, food safety and quality culture. A lot of confusion here. I must tell you this because other schemes have already introduced this requirement, like your BRCGS, for example. In terms of the FSSC, most of the requirements under ISO 22000 actually do address some of these things. So if you read the guidance document, it will tell you exactly where communication is being addressed, where training is being addressed, where employee feedback is engagement is being addressed. But pay attention in terms of what is it that the auditor will be looking for. So don't assume that the ISO 22000 addresses it, but check exactly the guidance document as to, okay, this is the clause that the additional requirements would want this to address, but am I addressing it as per the clause? You read the clause, you read what is the requirement, what the auditor will be looking for, and what is it that you should produce as a site to speak to communication, training, employee feedback, and engagement. The biggest problem that you are going to have is under performance measurement of defined activities covering all organizational sections impacting food safety and so this is where we are going to have an issue, and I've just indicated here what is it that the auditors will be looking for to try to assist you in terms of the performance measurement elements. What is it that the auditors specifically will be looking for? So they'll look at they will assess how the organization's food safety and quality performance is measured. For example, food safety and quality performance targets, are they being established and monitored? The assessment that is included in the interview personnel on the shop floor, for example, check to see if departmental targets have been set, ask how they are monitored and when they are reported on, and request evidence of this, okay? Verify how personnel receive feedback on production performance and food safety or quality issues. Is it done on a company dashboard? Is it done during meetings? Is it indicated on each departmental dashboard? How do you give feedback? Then it will also look into assessing how top management evaluates food safety or quality performance. For example, personnel survey that is executed periodically, specifically related to food safety or quality, including the food safety and quality culture of the organization. We will also look at assessing how complaints and non-conformance issues, which is something that you are already doing, by the way, are managed by the organization and top management, including a review of corrective actions. For example, checking how the trends or similar complaints are being handled, and how to ensure that the effectiveness of these actions taken are being implemented. And again, evidence of that will need to be produced. We'll also look at how increased productivity affects the food safety and quality culture of the organization. How do you assess that? How do you check for productivity? Are you using NCs during peak production? What is it that we are using as a measure of productivity? We are also going to look at the organization plans for changes and manages changes. So that will be under planning, under clause 6, where we are looking at change management. Again, evaluate how the organization implements changes on training results, including verify the output of management reviews and how that is being executed. So please pay attention to this. So everything else here is somehow addressed, but check if you are doing this. This is another issue here: employee feedback and engagement. So is it done through meetings? Is it done using questionnaires? Is it how are you doing it? You know, how to ensure that there's feedback and engagement with the employees. But this one, in terms of performance, please check this guidance on auditing the performance measurement element and see if you tick the box in terms of this, if this is being implemented by your side. Very, very important. I can promise you that this clause in version 9 of PRCGS, because it's exactly the same clause, it was a major problem for sites to understand, and most sites got finding because it was just not quite well understood as to how it should be implemented. Another interesting clause, quality control. This has been fueled by the fact that most organizations are focusing more on food safety, but they are completely ignoring quality control. So this is applicable to all food chain categories. So what is it that is required from organization? So this is a completely new clause, by the way, completely new, but most sites comply with it because quality control is one of the requirements that they are supposed to comply with. So the organization shall, in addition to clause 5.2 and 6.2 of ISO 22000, establish, implement, and maintain a quality policy and quality objectives. Remember, food safety looks at whether the food causes harm to the consumer or any foodborne illness or injury. In terms of food quality, we are looking at the appearance of the food, the organoleptic properties of the food. We are looking at whether the product provides value for money to the consumer. We are looking at whether it complies with the specifications of our company or the customer. So that's what this is going to be looked at. This is how it's going to be looked at when the audits come. We are going to look at is there a policy that speaks about the quality of the food, that speaks about the appearance, the specifications of the product that you are manufacturing? And if there is, what are the objectives related specifically to quality, not to the company, not related to the business, not related to food safety, but the quality of the food? So it's very clear there what this intends to achieve. So please check that. The organization shall also establish, implement, and maintain quality parameters in line with finished product specifications for all products and or product groups with the scope of certification, including product release that addresses quality control and testing. What does it mean? If I say that this fruit juice, I'm making an example with a random example. The bricks of this fruit juice must be so and so, maybe must be 13, right? Must be between 12 and 13. The color of this fruit juice must be this color. Maybe I'm using a color code dashboard. This is the ideal color of orange juice. This is the ideal color for banana juice. The weight of this juice should be in this way. There should be so much nectar in this juice. The amount of sugar, the nutritional, whatever measure, the energy, whatever that you use to measure, but ideally should be something that you can check as you release. Maybe the packaging, the label, whether it's skewed or not, the bricks which you can check, the pH of the juice, the color. So those things are basic. You can check them. You can take this juice and then say, okay, it meets these requirements. These are the parameters that we are referring to. And the scheme requirements even goes further, that we then have to check, right? These are the parameters. And as you release the product, are you checking against these specifications? But also remember that your customers could have additional requirements. How are you then taking that into account? So this is what this requirement aims to achieve, and make sure that you pay attention to that. Okay. So analysis and evaluation of the result of the quality control parameters must be included as input in your review. So that is another thing that you must include in your review. It will become quite comprehensive. So quality control is part of the things that you should be discussing in your review. It goes further that in addition to and aligned to clause 9.2 of ISO 2018, including quality elements as defined in this clause within the scope of the internal audit. So internal audit must also include quality control. And then again, quality control procedures, including for unit, weight, and volume, shall be established and implemented to ensure products meet the applicable customer and legal requirements. Important there, customer and legal requirements, especially for things that have got legislation or regulation like your X, for example, the grading of X. There is a specific regulation that looks into that. So you shall ensure that you check whether you still meet those requirements, IQF, all those kind of products that have got specific regulations. Again, it goes further to say that the line startup and changeover procedures shall be established and implemented to ensure products, including packaging and label, meet applicable customer and legal requirement. This shall include having controls in place to ensure labeling and packaging from the previous run have been removed from the line. What do you mean by that? Line startup or changeover, right? The previous day I was producing yogurt, okay, strawberry yogurt. Then the next day I decide that I'm going to produce fat-free. Maybe yesterday I was doing low-fat yogurt, and then today I'm doing fat-free yogurt, right? We must show that before you started the line, you check that there is no label from the previous run. You have checked that the line is clean. You have checked that there is no packaging. You have checked that whatever that was used in the previous run is not present on that line, which could affect traceability or cause cross-contamination. So for those of you maybe in the meat industry, maybe it was a meatloaf, and now I have a ham, you know, in my high-risk area. You know, we need to see those line checks, where you do those checks before you start a new run. Then it happens that at 10 o'clock, you decide to move over to a new product. The procedure must specify that if I move over to a new product, what is it that I will do? And it must be linked to your checklist. Let's say that you say you are going to clean thoroughly, you are going to do just maybe swabs to check for the protein present, for allergens. That must be in the procedure. And then the checks that you'll do must be recorded as such. So that's what the procedure aims to achieve. So please pay attention to that. Then let's move to clause 10, which is transport, storage, and warehousing, applicable to all food chain categories. There are additional requirements, but it's specifically related to the category F1, where it says that the organization shall ensure that the product is transported and delivered under conditions which minimize potential contamination risk. And then where transport tankers are used, for example, those of us who are in the dairy industry, where you are using transport tankers, you must ensure that the use of tankers for transportation for final product shall have a documented risk-based plan to address transport tanker cleaning. It shall consider potential sources of cross-contamination and appropriate control measures, including cleaning validation. Measures shall be in place to assess cleanliness of the tankers at the point of reception of the empty tanker prior to loading. So that is something that you need to make sure that you implement. Again, for organizations receiving raw materials in tankers, the following shall be included in the supply agreement. So the SLA that you sign with the supplier, you must include tanker cleaning validation, restrictions linked to prior use, and applicable control measures relevant to the product being transported. So you shall ensure that that is included in your SLA. Then 2.511, there are changes there. The most important change is under C and D. where the site shall ensure that for category D, remember category D deals with the processing of feed and animal feed. So please remember that. So for those who belong to that category, the following requirement applies in addition to the technical specification clause 4.7, where you are required to have in place procedures to manage the use of ingredients or additives that contain components that can have an adverse animal health impact. So you are supposed to include that. And then under D, for all food chain categories, excluding F2, which is about, I think, brokers, as we said, brokering, trading, or e-commerce, the following requirements relating to foreign matter management shall apply. The organization shall have a risk assessment in place to determine the need and type of foreign body detection equipment required, and where the organization deems that no foreign body detection equipment is necessary, justification shall be maintained as documented information. So in our toolkits, those of you who have bought our toolkit, you'll see that we have got a decision tree that we have taken from BRCGS that you go through that explains why you don't need foreign material. So you can use that because that is a documented decision tree where we have got a foreign material procedure, and then you go through the questions to see whether you need that foreign material or not. So that will be acceptable because it is documented evidence. Okay, so but then you cannot tell the auditor that we don't need a foreign material foreign material equipment like your metal detector or your X-ray because our product is low risk. No, the standard saying all food chain categories. So that's the requirement. So in other words, no one is exempted. You cannot justify it based on what you are saying. It must be documented as to why you feel that you don't need it as part of your processing step, the risk assessment. Okay. There must also be a documented procedure for management and use of equipment selected. The organization shall have a procedure for foreign matter management, including procedures for the management of breakages linked to potential physical contamination. Most of us already have this. We have it in the form of glass and brittle material checklists as well as the procedures. Then under product design and development, there is just a minor change there where a process for ongoing shelf life verification shall be in place at a frequency based on risk. So that is for all categories, specifically for chain categories B3, C, D, E, F, I, and K. So you must have a process for ongoing shelf life verification that could be in the form of your retention sample and sending the product for testing every now and then. Where ready-to-cook products is produced, the cooking instructions provided on the label or packaging shall be validated to ensure food safety is maintained. So if you're advising your client, this is how you should cook your product, you must validate that and you must document that validation instruction that you have sent to your that you have indicated on your customers. Here, big confusion. I'm pretty sure when this audit starts, here we are going to have a lot of confusion, and I would just want to show you one of our documents that tries to assist in terms of interpreting this requirement. I'll show you in a second, but firstly, let's go to the requirement. The first thing that the organization shall do is to have a documented purchase specification in place, which addresses hygienic design, applicable legal and customer requirements, and the intended use of the equipment, including the product handled. The supplier should also provide evidence of meeting their purchase specification prior to installation. So it's a document that you create that has this checklist, and the supplier must prove that they have been made aware or indeed they comply with that specific requirement. You must also, as an organization, establish and implement a risk-based change management process for new equipment and or any changes to existing equipment, which shall be adequately documented, including evidence of successful commissioning. Possible effects on existing systems shall be assessed and adequate control measures determined and implemented. Okay, very big confusion here. So let's just look at what is required. So in terms of the guidance document, so the organization should look to undertake the following. If changes to equipment are planned, you must update the hazard analysis. You must ensure that you update the cleaning and sanitation program and show evidence that this has been done, and establish whether outsourced services are required or whether cleaning and sanitation can be done internally. You must update the maintenance program and establish whether outsourced services are required or whether maintenance and servicing can be done internally. Update production records, review and update the environmental monitoring program, the allergen management program. A person can ask here, but if equipment, does it really mean that I must use? Yes. Yes, because some of the conveyor belts, the material that they are made of, may not necessarily be synthetic plastic. They could have some allergens. So you must take note of this, and review and update the training program and train relevant personnel on updated procedures, update any other relevant verification activities, and determine if additional resources are needed and when they'll be available should breakdown or faulty operations be experienced in the equipment. So in addition to this guidance, because the requirement has been very confusing to most people, I just want to show you here the documents that could assist you in terms of correctly interpreting this requirement. So for example, here, we have got the purchase specification that addresses these requirements. So here, general equipment information, it addresses everything that this requirement requires from you. So if you follow this, you should be fine. Equipment cross-contamination assessment at installation and equipment cross-contamination assessment at post-installation. So if you use this, you should meet the requirement of the standard. Another document that I want to share with you, I think most of you, most sites would have this document, the post-installation final inspection, to also address some of these requirements. So you can also use this document as a guide, okay? Post-installation, final equipment installation, to see if you have complied with the requirements of the standard. Then it talks about pre-commissioning at some stage. This is a checklist. You can modify it, of course, as you wish. Because equipment could differ, but it would be better for you to make it a generic document where you are looking at, the certain items. It could be general, it could be control system, it could be function, but it does not necessarily need to be as per each equipment. It could be a generic document that you then implement and use as a site for pre-commissioning, for example, to ensure that you comply with the requirement of the standard. Okay, so let's go back to then our presentation, looking at what is it that the standard requires further. Okay. Okay, so for those of you who joined us late, we will have a section for Q&A. At this moment, you can just take down your notes, and then we will proceed to then take your questions after I've done my presentation. Okay. Food loss and waste. So this one is new. It has really nothing to do with food safety or food quality, but it's the alignment with the UN sustainable goals to minimize food waste. That's what it is aimed at doing. So as a site, you must ensure that you have documented policy and objectives detailing the organization's strategy to reduce food loss and waste within the organization and the related supply chain. You shall have controls in place to manage products donated to for-profit organizations, employees, and other organizations, and ensure that these products are safe to consume. Importantly, though, you must be able to show that you have done a traceability study to prove that, okay, I donated so much to so many workers, and this is the evidence, So if you donated 50 tons, then of course record the batch of that product so that when you do your mass balance, it could then balance. You must have a system of managing surplus products or byproducts intended as animal feed or food to prevent contamination of these products. So you could specify that there is a dedicated storage area for such products. So that's what the requirements requires from you. The processes shall comply with the applicable legislation, be kept up to date, and not have a negative impact on food safety. So this is basically what the requirement here. It is applicable to all food chain categories, excluding the food chain category I. Okay. Communication requirements, new requirement as well. So here we are looking at making sure that if there is any incident that occurs in your facility, you are able to communicate that with the certification body. And it says that those things or those incidents must be communicated within 3 working days and must be communicated to the certification body. It then gives a guidance what those requirements are. So it could be serious events that impact the food safety management system, the legality and integrity of certification. For example, situations that threaten food safety or certification due to force majeure, natural or man-made disasters, public food safety incidents like your recalls, your withdrawals, your food safety outbreaks, your calamities. So food safety outbreaks like your listeriosis crisis that we had in 2017, 2018. It could also include actions imposed by regulatory authorities, such as that are a result of food safety issue and where additional monitoring or forced shutdown of production is required. For example, if you have been shut down by EHPs because you don't comply to the requirements of regulation R638, or perhaps you have got a food safety outbreak and then the NICD inspectors or researchers come to your facility with the Department of Health and close down your facility, you are supposed to inform the certification body. When there are legal proceedings, prosecutions, malpractice and negligence and fraudulent activities and corruption, inform your certification body within 3 days. Okay, so it's getting stricter in terms of this because the scheme is also trying to protect its integrity and the integrity of certification bodies to ensure that when you get the certification, you deserve to have it. And because if you then have any one of these incidents, they could interpret it as their certification has been brought to disrepute, and they will then try to protect the integrity of the scheme. Then clause 2.5.18 that relates to requirements for organizations with multi-site certifications. So those are the organizations that have got different sites and they have got auditors that they send in the organization to audit the different site. But then the certification body will only sample and audit based on the sample that they have done. So this is applicable to category E, F, and G. And it also, with the new requirement that has been introduced, the management of the central function shall ensure that there is sufficient resources available and that roles, responsibilities, and requirements are clearly defined for management, internal auditors, technical personnel reviewing the internal audits that have been conducted by internal auditors, as well as other key personnel that is involved in the food safety management system. So that is the key requirement. Another one is the internal audit requirements. So in addition to clause 9.2 of ISO 22000 that deals with internal audit, the organization shall ensure that they adhere to the following requirements, where the internal audit procedure and program shall be established by the central function, which will then be your head office, and internal auditors shall be independent of the areas that they audit and be assigned by the central function to ensure the impartiality of the site. And also the management system, centralized function, and all sites shall be audited at least annually or more frequently based on the risk assessment, and effectiveness of corrective action shall be demonstrated. Then the requirements for the internal auditors that you send to audit the other sites are as follows. They must have work experience of at least 2 years full-time in the food industry, including at least 1 year in the organization. They shall have completed a higher education course, or the absence of a formal, or in the absence of a formal course, have at least 5 years of work experience in food production or manufacturing, transport, storage, retailing, or inspection or enforcement. You can just go further to look at the additional requirements. There is quite a lot of things that are mentioned here. We're just highlighting those that have been included. All right, so the audits of version 6 will only commence from the 1st April 2024 onwards, and it is expected that all organizations must complete their upgrade to version 6 before the 31st of March 2025. So everyone should have version 6 as from April 2025. So next year, it will be a transition period. So what we have done, we have launched an online course, which I think will be released as from the 1st of November, which we will then discuss version 6. So that online course is self-paced. It's 1 day. You can do it at your own time, but it should take about 6 to 8 hours. If you want to enroll for it, you are more than welcome to enroll as from the 1st of November. That will then focus on the requirements for version 6. Right. This is where I will end off. I'm going to then allow a Q&A session, but from myself and the team here at ASC at the head office, we would like to say thank you so much for attending this webinar. We sincerely hope that it was informative to you, and you'll find it available as you go for your audits and as you go through the transition period until April 2024. I wish you all the best. And of course, if you need assistance, we're here to assist you. We do have a toolkit that we have for version 6 that you can purchase if you wish. Okay, so thank you so much. Any questions before I close the session?
Hello, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Loud and clear, Yonela, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to ask on the labeling claims section, if you are a bulk producer and then your sister plant then is a packer for whatever you produce in bulks, do you need to have the validation studies as well for the claims on the product, or that will be audited in your sister plant?
No, remember that the sister plant will fall under a different scope. And is it the one site or it's completely different sites? Your certification?
Completely.
Yes.
Completely different sites. The certification is ours, their certification is theirs.
You will need to validate those claims unless you can prove that, unless you have got an SLA of some sort where they validated on your behalf and then you record that. So, but your procedure must indicate that this specific site, they have done this study, because I mean, if they do it in a laboratory, the laboratory result will be the same. But that study must be present at your site and it must be included as part of your procedure. Then what you can do, normally with bulk, we don't necessarily need to label the bulk or whatever. We send it with the COA, and the COA will indicate what is in that product. So if you do that, that is fine.
Okay.
All right, great. Another question? Okay. All right, okay, great. So no one is asking any questions. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a brilliant day. And I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, MT. Bye.
Thank you, Telani. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, but sometimes his voice would get low.